Hello and welcome to another episode of Fully Supported, and this time we're going to talk about what type of support tip, style, or size, I guess, to use in the case of supporting. A lot of people ask me how I know when to use light, medium, or heavy. And the answer is not really that simple, but we're going to cut into the guts of that in just a moment. First, I wanted to announce something really cool that we have now become part of the Lychee Slicer Ambassador Program. And in order to kind of honor that, we're also going to be releasing this awesome Nuka-Cola model, not just the bottle, but the entire character that goes along with it. The Nuka-Cola girl, she sits on top of the bottle, she's got a little ray gun. It's a really cool piece. She stands about 30 centimeters plus tall, including the bottle itself. And we're going to be giving that away pre-supported on their Discord channel. So do join that channel, and you will get a copy of the STL files and the Lychee Slicer files that are pre-supported, ready to go. But warn you, though, these are big files. You will need a big printer to make these things happen. There's a 20 centimeter edition and a 30 centimeter edition. The 20 centimeter edition, I don't know if I'm going to be giving that one away as well, but we'll see. I will probably include that as well. We'll probably give you guys the options of using either or. The episode, though, however, as we were discussing earlier, is to kind of determine what kind of support you're going to use. Now, this isn't always as easy as just going, oh, I'm going to use heavy supports on a big object. Okay, sure, that sounds like common sense. And for the most part, you would probably want to use heavy supports on a big object. However, in the case of hollowed objects, or objects that have an odd orientation, or objects that are just really long, or whatever the case is, you always have to look at it as kind of like a case-by-case basis and look at each particular object and how that's going to build. And this is really important in order to determine what type of supporting you're going to use. But honestly, I kind of also use a height system. The way I do it is I will put my lights at the bottom with usually maybe one or two clusters of mediums in there in order to accommodate some of the excess weight at the top. I will then do a series of mediums towards the middle, and I will also do some mediums at the bottom, like I said, in order to accommodate the weight at the top. The framework starts with mediums and lights. As I get taller, as the object starts to get really tall, and I'm talking, pretty much anything over 100 to 125 millimeters, your light supports start to get this, I don't want to call it a bend or a wobble. They definitely tend to fail more at higher lengths if you're using a really light support style than you would with a heavier support style. And obviously this sounds like common sense too, and yeah, it is common sense. You should already know, okay, a really skinny support rod, if I put it in liquid and then press it up against the surface and then pop it off, is it going to move a little bit? Probably. Is it going to be dramatic movement? No. But it will be enough to throw a support off a nanometer or two, which would be enough to make a part of your print fail. What I would do in the case of most large objects is we do a perimeter setup in heavies, which of course you can see my heavy setups in my description as well as what I'm looking at on the screen here. We do a middle perimeter in mediums and heavies around the edge only. And then anything that goes above a certain height distance, I'll start doing heavies. But I'll only do heavies in groups where I feel the need that they are going to either have a wobble or movement or some sort of level failure. Now, it's taken me a while to figure out the best way to do this. And honestly, you could probably take a cluster of light supports, you could bridge them off the top, and then you could brace them together, and they probably would stay together just fine in most cases. There are going to be those random cases, though, where those supports will move enough because of a hard pop away from the FEP, whether it's just stability or resin or just environmental issue. Sometimes that will cause a problem. I have seen where the object has worked just fine, and then I have seen cases where the object will work not just fine. And it's supported the same way. It's not like we change the the factor between one or the other. What I'm doing here just to demonstrate is just some heavies, and then I'm just going to auto brace them together, because this is usually enough. A couple of heavy supports with the settings I use, some auto bracings together, usually strong enough that will hold itself together pretty well. Won't really have support failures, or won't really expect it with that. Now for the middle section, like I said, I would start going down to medium size. We don't really need to have super heavy supports all the way through the entire thing. It's hollow, so it's not going to be mega heavy. The problem is you just don't want to lose parts of the model or lose parts of the frame or detail or have any of it pull away because some of it is heavier than the other parts. The whole object itself is going to be a little heavy when you think about it because it is of just generally its size. Regardless of hollowing, fluid use, whatever, it's still going to result in quite a large object. That being said, you kind of still need to consider that and remember that when you're actually doing your supporting, and keep that in mind. Like I said, mediums in the middle, past a certain height, you can be the judge here, but my guesstimate has always been between 100 to 125 millimeters. I start switching from my mediums to my heavies. And I start using those religiously up there because it just does a better job. I have less chance of the support rods failing, and then I can look back and go, okay, this part was maybe supported too heavy. I can tone that down a little bit, and I'll just framework it in heavier supports where those will kind of connect to it on the bracing side where they're supporting the internal rods, and the internal rods are actually mediums. So you can do it that way where you kind of mix and match the way that you're doing your support system. And if that's confusing, I'm actually going to do an episode in the future where I explain how to support your supports. I know that sounds strange. Essentially, that would be like taking a support, running a heavy support next to a support that is perhaps medium or light, and then bracing it to it. Now, this of course, is causing that to take a much heavier support and you're bracing it towards a much lighter support with braces that are going to create a good solid connection. And hopefully the goal is to create something that's going to print much more quality than what you were just doing the support on its own without the additional bracing help from the other piece. Now, again, once we bring back our other supports here, you can see how I'm already kind of corresponding with what I'm doing here. I'll go back to the bottom. We'll start using some mediums around the fringe edge here where this print is starting. And you can use lights in the mix as well if you want to. But an object this large is going to mostly be mediums and heavies. You're going to use maybe lights where you're talking about fine detail or towards the edge of the Nuka-Cola emblems, maybe towards the bottom or the edge of a hole, something like that. That's where you're going to want to use your lights. But for the most part, you're going to want to use your mediums and your heavies. And the reason is just because you're just going to want that durability. You don't want to chance this failing halfway through, and then you have to reprint a bottle. That is just a lot of layers worth of stuff you don't want to waste, and you really just don't want to do it twice. And so I think it's most important to make sure that you get something like this, a big object. Just make sure that you're putting enough of a mixture of mediums and heavies. Like I said, you can combine the lights in there if you want to, but don't use them too high up. And if you do use them towards the middle or the bottom, just make sure that they're sectioned together, you brace them together, and you do each individual group of light supports on its own rather than trying to make them the majority. Now, of course, if you're working with a smaller object like an arm or a torso or something, you don't have to follow this tight of a stringent regimen as far as like the medium, light, heavy. I'll still go with the same factor where if something is very close to the ground, I'm going to use lights on it. If something is about halfway up the model, I'm probably going to use mediums. And if we have a really large or hard solid object, I'm probably going to incorporate a couple heavies just to anchor it in. Now, the difference between using a heavy as an anchor and just judging and basing on distance and going, this is really tall, I need to throw some heavies on it, that's really just representational of the object. And honestly, that really depends on what you want to do with it. So anyway, that's all we have time for this episode, guys. I hope that you learned a lot here today. I really appreciate y'all watching as always. See y'all real soon.